Welcome to the LearnSkin podcast with Dr. Raja and Dr. Hadar, where they discuss all things skin. Skin is fascinating because it affects us in so many ways, like our health, psychology, and how we connect with those around us. This podcast delves into the art and science of skincare. A short disclaimer before we get to the good stuff. Dr. Raja Sivamani and Dr. Hadar Levtov are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only. All opinions shared do not express the views of LearnSkin. Neither this podcast nor any information contained within it are a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. This podcast does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services.
Hey Raja, how are things going today?
Hey Hadar, how are things going for you?
Pretty good. I'm ready for another podcast. In fact, I'm loaded with excitement about this natural approach to skincare, which I think we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, well, who better to talk about it with than Dr. Hemali Gunt, who's the head of clinical and scientific affairs at Burts Bees. And Hemali, we are so excited to have you on this podcast, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Raja and Hadar. I'm really excited to be here.
Wonderful to have you here. And really, what we wanted to talk about today is your experience and the data that you have generated, which is quite robust and prolific, if I may say, about the use of nature. Can you tell us about the concept behind these and how you approach designing a product when you go about thinking of the concept of nature and using it to help skin?
That's a great segue into, starting the conversation. We at Burts, obviously, we have been formulating natural care products for over 30 years. Our formulators, our chemists are really so ingrained in actually looking back at history. I mean, if you really go back, I don't know, to maybe 3000 BC or 5000 BC. And, we look at the evolution of skincare. And at that point in time, right, I mean, folks were still using product or ingredients like beeswax and honey, milk, Dead Sea salts. Yeah. It's eventually grown into, herbal extracts and use of honey, cucumbers, a lot of cultural references to use of shea butter in Africa, and use of ginseng and, turmeric in the East Asian cultures. So we are constantly learning from the tradition, but we are also at the same time looking at what research is out there. And honestly, one of the industries that we try to follow is the food industry. It's always like 5 years ahead of where skincare is. And
that's so interesting, yeah.
And they do their research, and our philosophy is using whole ingredients. And we usually, internally at Burts, we call it the whole formula. But essentially what we refer to when we talk about a whole formula is that we are using all components of a particular plant or a particular, like all components, including the leaf, the roots. And it's very similar to what the food industry does, right? I mean, you really don't isolate a lycopene or a fatty acid out of a food and you don't consume that.
That's true.
You eat the vegetable or the fruit as a whole, and that's exactly the same philosophy that we follow. So we have been doing that for 30 years, and for the longest time, honestly, it's been that natural has been enough. And in the last few years, obviously, a lot of other brands are coming up, and we have realized that there are questions being asked, and understandably so, it's by professionals like you. And we really realize that we need to highlight our scientific credibility when it comes to natural products. And the best way to do it is through clinical, safety and efficacy. So that is what
absolutely.
Our focus has been.
It's really interesting. I think it's really interesting that we're kind of taking a full circle now because, like you said, thousands of years ago, it was all about what was around naturally and how can we harness everything naturally. Like you said, you couldn't break apart a phytochemical and go grab a phytochemical and necessarily use that in isolation. And now we've kind of come full circle. So, Hemali, what do you think is the reason that the general public and even practitioners, now we see this big shift? Why are we so in love with natural products, or this whole notion of trying to focus on bringing nature into therapeutics?
So I really don't want to get philosophical, but at the same time, I mean, we are part of nature, right? So I think it's only natural that we gravitate towards it. And also being, rational, logical thinkers, when we have data, we gravitate towards that. And for the longest time, Western medicine has done an extremely good job at explaining science, whereas when it comes to natural ingredients, they have left it to the storytelling, or you look at things of that nature. But
Right.
we are trying to catch up, and we at Burts are really trying to close that gap. So it's a very exciting time, I believe, for the natural industry.
Yes, thank you very much. And like other people say, even Cleopatra needed a dermatologist. So thank you for highlighting that. And I love the fact that it's natural to you to want to use nature. That's a great reason for me. And I think that's really, Raja, answering your question, because I see this in my patients in clinic. People keep asking, do you have something natural? Now, I do have to remind them that, a lot of the stuff we already use is derived from nature, but certainly your passion for generating data is what I think really excited us. And I think Raja and I, years ago, we used to sit around the table and complain that, oh my God, there's no data for this and no data for that. And here you guys go and do head-to-head studies, which is kind of a ballsy thing to do in our day and age. So maybe you tell us a little bit about some of the data you generated in these head-to-head studies so we can learn how to use the products that are available in a better way.
Sure, definitely. So, I mean, we have been testing our products for safety and efficacy, effectiveness for the longest time. It's just that we were really not talking about it. And then about, 5 years ago, we realized, like I said, that there is that gap. And we decided to take this bold step. Part of me was nervous, part of the R&D was nervous, but at the same time, we believe in the products that we are formulating. And we took a chance, and we decided to run a head-to-head studies, and we focused on our sensitive skin care product line. Essentially, in the last 5-10 years, there has been such a rise in sensitive skin. I mean, if you look at some of the epidemiological data, I mean, about 40% of the population defines themselves as sensitive skin these days. So with that being on the rise, with that really being also a component of patients, that you are constantly coming in touch with, we thought that would be the perfect set of products for us to study. And we compared our products, the entire product line, which included the cleanser, the day cream, the night cream, with a gold standard product that has been used by you dermatologists for, over 50 years. And what we wanted to show is that our products are just as tolerable and effective as the gold standard that you use. So in one of the very first studies that we conducted on our sensitive skin products, we tested our product line against a synthetic control, which was the leading dermatologist recommended brand. We studied our products in a population of sensitive skin, which included atopic dermatitis, cosmetic intolerance, and rosacea. And there were two groups of 40 subjects each, and one used our skincare products and the other used the control leading dermatologist recommended brand synthetic regimen for a period of 4 weeks. The subjects were blinded. The investigator, who was a dermatologist, was blinded. And at the end of 4 weeks, the results came out such that we improved the barrier function just as well as the synthetic control. But in addition to that, we improved a lot of other parameters that are really important to consumers, or to your patients for that matter, right? I mean, they don't just want an improved barrier. They want their skin to look radiant. They want their skin to feel smooth, look soft, and the texture should be good. So all those parameters that were evaluated by the blinded dermatologist were statistically significant in comparison to the synthetic control. So, I mean, that was fascinating to us. And we were obviously over the moon. And that work was published in the JDD last year.
That's the Journal of Drugs and Dermatology.
That is correct.
What's really interesting is that when you talk about your sensitive skincare line, I think just to take a step back, Burt's has had a strong heritage and a strong lineage in lip products, but you do much more than lip products, don't you, Hemali?
Bingo. That is correct. We are always, if we talk about Burt's Bees, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is our lip balm. We have a very strong heritage in lip products, but at the same time, our sensitive skincare products was launched about 10 years ago, actually. So we have been in the skincare space for a very long time. It's just, bringing the awareness.
Yeah. And, the other thing is when you're thinking about skincare or lip care or whatever it is, there's so many ingredients to choose from. So how do you go about picking an ingredient, or what is the process that you use in vetting ingredients?
So this is such a crucial topic, right? And oftentimes, actually, it's overlooked. One, I started off by saying, that our chemists are really going back into history and looking at what was used in the early days, what different kinds of cultures are using to treat their skin conditions. And obviously with different regions, there are different ingredients. We are constantly also keeping up with trends. And not only that, then we look at different industries. And an example that I gave you is the food industry. We look at what kind of research is being done there when it comes to certain ingredients that we are looking at. But taking it one step further, there are questions around, sourcing of the ingredients, right? And it has been our top mission to make sure that our ingredients are sourced responsibly. And we do a lot in that space. We have launched a community sourced program. And one of the very first projects was to focus on beeswax that comes from Tanzania. And we really want to make sure that in doing so, we respect the communities wherever the ingredients are coming from, not only the communities, but also the environment that we are sourcing from. So the few things that we look at is location, the quality, the availability. But then the second piece that a lot of folks really don't understand is that because natural ingredients, they are such a complex matrix of bioactive components. And because we cannot isolate each one individually, we really have to assess for the concentration, purity, and activity. And we do that on every single lot. So we can ensure that every batch that is being produced has that same activity every single time. So we really work very closely with our partners to provide transparency when it comes to the amounts of the particular actives that we are looking for, or the concentrations, the parts of plants that we are using. And if it is extracted, there is a thorough review of the entire process, whether it's standardized, validated. So there are so many pieces that go into a selection of ingredients. And honestly, very few meet the cut when it comes to our raw material qualification process. It's a very rigorous process that a lot of the teams get together. It's our regulatory team, our toxicology team, our research team that comes together to ensure that the ingredient is going to deliver not just the effectiveness or the efficacy that we are looking for, but also safety.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, because that was my question that I wanted to ask you. And I remember back when Raja and I were looking and sifting through the data, and we published a few systematic reviews, we were always frustrated because the literature is littered with low quality control products. And that's really important when you're using natural products, especially when you want to use the whole ingredient. It's really an issue. And speaking of whole ingredients, I wanted to ask you back to your sensitive skin studies, because it's always a challenge when you use it on people who have some challenging barrier, and then you're introducing potential allergens. Have you found any adverse reactions when you use that in your studies?
So like I said, the sensitive skincare product, it was launched 10 years ago, and we have really not seen any consumer complaints for the past 10 years. And even in the study that we fielded last year, which I talked about, that is published, there were absolutely no adverse events or side effects. In fact, at every single time we do the objective analysis or assessments that is done by the investigator, we also have a comparable subjective assessment. And in the subjective assessment, over 90% of the subjects preferred our products over the control.
This is very refreshing to see that you're doing these sorts of studies in general, Hemali. And now talking about ingredients, I was really excited to even get to know about Bakuchiol. When we first heard about Bakuchiol, this was a while ago, and I thought, okay, I want to do a head-to-head study, and you may be familiar, but we compared Bakuchiol to retinol in a head-to-head study and published it in the British Journal. And now we're starting to see that there are so many Bakuchiol products that are now coming out. There's all this buzz around it. So I know that you're looking at this ingredient pretty closely. Can you talk a little bit more about Bakuchiol, what attracted you, and how you plan to use it?
Interestingly enough, actually, we have been following Bakuchiol for over probably 5 to 6 years, I want to say.
I see.
And the timing was perfect, where we found the perfect vendor that was able to, qualify in our raw material process and ensure that, we were going to get the same active with the same activity and the same composition every single time. And then the research that you published, obviously, it's the cherry on top. The timing was perfect. And we recently launched our renewal product line, which is essentially our anti-aging product line with Bakuchiol. And we are going to be presenting some of that data at the upcoming IDS. But the ingredient has been, trending in Asia for, like I said, for almost, 6-8 years. So it's an ingredient which has been known, and actually it goes back to probably 100 years ago when, it was used to treat some of the skin conditions. So it's really not like a new ingredient. It's just like we are hearing about it now.
No, that's true. Actually, it's a phytochemical within Bakuchi, which is an Ayurvedic herb.
Right.
And I do want to clarify, just for all the listeners, that when we did the study, I had no clue you guys were even looking at this. We just worked with an ingredient manufacturer and did the study because I thought it was a very potentially interesting ingredient. But this is very interesting to see how you've obviously been looking at this for a while. Now, you mentioned something that I thought was very, very interesting. You said that they had been using this in Asia. Now, do you look to a lot of other cultures to kind of get an early read on trends or things that you might want to think about ahead of time? And does that mean, Hemali, you get to travel everywhere?
Yes. Yes, I mean, it's obviously just not me. It's our entire R&D group, and we have fabulous chemists who have been in the skincare industry formulating collectively, I don't know, for like over 50 years, if you take their combined experiences, maybe more. So they have been embedded in this industry for a long time. There are a lot of international shows. And yes, the Asian shows are very different from the shows in Europe and within the US. But the ingredients that are typically highlighted there are really different. And it's fascinating to see how what they are thinking versus what we are thinking, and what we think is trending here.
So now I'm starting to put everything together, because you were talking about food before and kind of following trends of food and then traveling to places. So now I get your job. You get to travel around, eat in great restaurants, and then come back and say, put that in the product. I think I'm in the wrong business.
No, but reality, Hemali, tell us, how many hours a day do you work? I mean, being a head of clinical and scientific affairs, I've got to imagine you probably don't have sleep on the number one thing on the task list here.
I love my job. It's not my job, it's my passion.
Oh, that's great.
So
That's wonderful.
It is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful what I get to do.
And I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you on our podcast is because we want to highlight careers that are available in integrative dermatology for people who are seeking to reach beyond just patient care. There's a whole industry that develops around it, and we are, as a community, in need of industry to use the resources they have available to generate this good data that we can use to support patient care. So there's a whole community that's building up, and we are obviously, should say here at this point, that you are a sponsor of IDS, and we're very grateful for that. And along with other companies, just trying to build a community together of responsible, data-driven care for patients in a good integrative way. And with that in mind, perhaps you can tell us what's in the pipeline then. What should we look for some surprises from your laboratory?
At the IDS, so you're talking about a few months from now.
Well, tell us what you want. Let's start with IDS because we obviously want to hear about that, but we want to hear more. I think our listeners are always listening and wanting to know what's new and what's coming down the pipeline.
Sure. I just talked about, one particular study that we did on the sensitive skin population using our sensitive skincare products. But following that, we have done 3 different very interesting projects. One was use of our sensitive skincare products as an adjunct therapy in patients with moderate to severe rosacea. So there were patients who were actually using metronidazole, and then they just changed their skincare regimen to our product, and we evaluated the improvement in their skin. And that work also has been published in the JDD. Taking that one step forward, we actually took our products to Bangkok, Thailand, which is one of the highest polluted areas. And we tested it on subjects who were positive lactic acid stingers. So they had, a disrupted barrier, and as a result of that, they had those sensorial symptoms to lactic acid. And they were initially using a synthetic treatment, and then we switched them over to our skincare product line, sensitive skincare product line. And in using that product line for 4 weeks, we saw that their sensorial symptoms to lactic acid decreased. And not only that, there was also a reduction in the carbonated proteins. So we are protecting your skin when, it comes to exposure to high polluted areas. So that is one piece of data that we'll be presenting at the IDS next week, and we are really thrilled to be sharing that with you. In addition to that, obviously we have a variety of products. The other product that is really, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, right? Those are the 2 components that are really needed on a daily basis to make sure that your skin is protected. So we conducted a study in basically trying to measure photoprotection in UV radiated skin. And where we see, what we see is that after 8 weeks of treating skin with our antioxidant-rich facial oil, you're protecting the skin, where we see reduced erythema and decreased sunburn cells. And that is also a piece of data that we are presenting at IDS next week. Additionally, we'll be talking about Bakuchiol. We already touched upon that, but we have used some in vitro assays, and we are trying to characterize the anti-inflammatory activity of that particular ingredient and, bring our renewal skincare products to you. What I'm really most excited about, honestly, Raja and Hadar, is that we are doing something really different, which is we are going to be launching our first of a kind natural product resource. We're actually creating a website for you dermatologists, for you professionals, and you get a sneak preview of that at the IDS. So there is
Oh, wow. Well, folks, you heard it here first.
Now, that's very exciting. One thing that I have to commend, especially in what you're talking about, a lot of times what will happen is people will source ingredients. And obviously, it's important that the ingredient manufacturers do some research to get some baseline data on their ingredients, and then they'll put it, and then a brand manufacturer will put it into their product, and then they'll quote the original studies that were done by the ingredient manufacturer, which is some level of data. But it sounds to me that you're going to another level where you're taking your products and testing your products directly, so that now we don't have that confounder of what does the vehicle do, or what do all the different ingredients that go in to make that whole product do. And so when you test that directly, you really are looking at what that product actually does rather than trying to infer it off of.
Right. You're absolutely correct.
And I'm really excited about this product resource, Hemali. I wish we had more time so you could just take us through it. But I guess you'll just have to come to the IDS.
Yes, you have to come to the IDS. You have to come to our booth. Come chat with us. There are going to be a lot of fun things that we are going to be doing. We also have some giveaway prizes. You can sign up for our website at our booth. So this is an official invitation to your audience to
Wonderful.
come to the ITS.
That's excellent. And remember, folks, this is just one piece of the IDS. It's a fantastic meeting. We're all very excited about the lineup of speakers, and we have a great industry panel and much more surprises. Thank you, Hemali, for highlighting some of your data, especially in rosacea. I think folks forget a lot of times that there's a need to renew the barrier in addition to everything else you're doing when you treat the skin. So it's very important to find products that patients can use. I prefer products that are over the counter, so it's a chronic condition, so they're not dependent on me to come for prescription each time. And people with rosacea have very sensitive skin. And so thank you for highlighting that. It's really needed. I'm wondering if you find in any of your products any antimicrobial effects?
Again, it comes down to the whole formula, right? And, if you look at honey, for example, it has anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial effect. If you look at some of the oils, they have similar effects, Most natural ingredients, what I have seen is that a combination of activities are always found, depending upon the concentration of the free fatty acids. There are some terpenes, there are polyphenolic compounds, there are tocopherols. So collectively, they provide the anti-inflammatory benefits, they provide the antioxidant effects, and then in addition, some ingredients have antimicrobial effects. For example, the one that comes at top of my head is the resveratrol.
Right. Yes. And the reason I'm asking this is because, first of all, microbiome is a hot topic, and the skin microbiome, we're learning more and more in its role in creating, at the very least, some dysregulation, dysbiosis on one hand, and dysregulation of innate immune system. That plays a role with many different skin conditions. So, kind of looking into the future for other applications of your product. And then I'm wondering, speaking of looking into the future, anything coming down the pipeline beyond IDS?
Yeah, so we are definitely constantly thinking about, what next big scientific conference in skincare is. And obviously, no one can forget the AAD. That's coming up in March of 2020. We will definitely be there. We have submitted abstracts for that particular meeting.
That's the American Academy of Dermatology for our audience, right?
Right. And we'll be sharing a lot of findings, interesting findings in our lip care discoveries, more on Bakuchiol, and probably some on our sensitive skin products too.
All right. Well, speaking of lips, those are tight lips. Okay, we're going to have to go to Denver and find out. Fine. I'm hooked.
I'm curious if you have any advice when people are looking at products in general, looking to brands, how can they tell if a brand has commitment to quality? What are some of your suggestions that they should be looking for?
That's a tough one, Raja, honestly. And we kind of, debate about it. What is the best way to go about it? Clearly, unlike the drugs, cosmetics, skincare products are not regulated. So, all we can disclose is the ingredients. We really can't disclose, the percent of the formula or the compositional breakdown and things of that nature. We try to give a lot of information on our website, and we are trying to honestly be as transparent as possible, and we are continually pushing ourselves to do so. It's hard, I would say, but at the same time, I would say, talk to your skincare providers. They are the ones who are looking at, who's doing the research, who's doing the due diligence. And we are obviously working on, bringing that material to you. So hopefully that allows that gap to slightly close. And, over the next few years, hopefully we can continue to close in that gap.
Yeah, I think you nailed exactly what I think is one of the key components of being able to talk about the brand in a very credible fashion, which is the practitioners, Hadar and myself included, we are always looking to see what research is being done by a brand, be it whether it's an oral or topical or some sort of gel or some sort of ingestible. I think the research and the commitment to research means a lot. So I think when you have patients or consumers coming and asking, we really kind of have to rely upon things that are published or things that are peer reviewed, where it's been put out to someone else to say, hey, this was reasonable or not reasonable.
Sure.
So I feel like that research component, and especially for the practitioners, when we start talking to patients, makes a huge difference. I mean, wouldn't you say, Hadar? I mean, don't you think that makes a big difference?
No, absolutely. There's no question. I think we all are driven by data. This is the information age, and practitioners are no different. And it gives us a sense of security when you prescribe something to your patient, regardless if it's over the counter or not. You make a recommendation. You want to feel that there's data to support that. So, yeah, no question.
And in addition, for the sensitive skincare products, we were granted the NEA seal of acceptance, which is the National Eczema Association, which if I understand correctly, is pretty well known amongst the dermatologists, and they look to that particular organization to have vetted through all the data, and then they have provided the seal.
Right, and that's one example of just being a part of a community
Exactly.
It's about integrative, kind of wholesome approach to healthcare, to skincare, and certainly you guys are at the forefront, and we thank you for that. And I think this is a good time to stop and thank you for your time and for your expertise and for telling us some of the data that you guys are producing. I'm sure that we're all going to go to our resources and try to look up those publications and inform our patients. And with that, I want to thank you again. And
thank you. I had a fun chat with the two of you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hemali.
Thank you for tuning in with Dr. Raja and Dr. Hadar. This podcast is brought to you by LearnSkin, leaders in integrative dermatology education. Visit learnskin.com/podcast to explore our many programs. Subscribe today and never miss an episode.